And we got a lot of questions here. So we're going to try to get to as many of these as we can. So feel free to answer kind of briefly. A lot of them we've kind of touched on a lot of the sessions already. But here's the first one. How do we as Christians navigate Canadian law and workplace policy that can fine, jail, or fire for misgendering a person?
Okay. Your question reminds me of Jesus saying, when they persecute you in one city, flee to another, meaning if you are able to avoid persecution of any kind, you should, without compromising truth. But if you legitimately can, if there are legitimate avenues, appealing either to human resources, finding Christian legal counsel, aligning with organizations that specialize in this, because plenty of Christian legal organizations will be there to try to assist you, at least find out what your options are. But I want to say this carefully. When push comes to shove, at some point we're going to have to say what Peter and John said. Well, I'm sorry, my back's against the wall. I ought to obey God rather than man.
Amen. Yeah.
But I also want to say that knowing full well, my ability to support my family does not depend on me doing that. Perhaps yours does. And so I will allow that it is very easy for someone to say that, much harder to do it. My belief is that if you absolutely cannot find any other option, if all other doors are closed and your only choice is I comply with that or I say no to it and lose my job, I believe God will provide you other work. But I do not want to be irresponsible and say that glibly. You would have to prayerfully determine for yourself, am I ready to take that kind of a stand? I believe that you should, but that's not quite good enough. You have to look at the word yourself to be fully convinced of what you should or should not do in a case like that. That's the short answer. I think the best thing you could do at this point, if you're facing that, if you haven't already gotten good legal counsel, either get a referral from your church or pastor and or go to one of the Christian legal organizations that defend freedom of speech and freedom of religion cases and find out from them what your options are, because there may be options you're not aware of, and in most cases there are. Yeah. I hope that'll be true for you.
Good. Thank you. Next question here. As a Christian parent, is it a loving boundary to prevent my 5-year-old son from having a close relationship with my sister and her same-sex spouse?
In most cases, I don't think that's necessary. It does depend on how your sister is handling it, of course. If your sister is talking about the issue, trying to influence your son, if she is engaging in displays of affection in front of him, I think you have the right to say, look, I do have to prioritize the teaching in my home that we adhere to. Please, I'm asking you to respect that while you're here. I want you to have a relationship with my son, but please do not promote to him what we don't believe in, even if you do, and we'll get along fine. But in most cases, I don't think you'll have to have that talk, and no, I don't believe there's anything wrong in that. Quick personal analogy to that, when my boys were young, we moved into a new home in the city of Orange, where we've lived since 1993 now, and we soon found out that our next-door neighbors were a lesbian couple. And they were two of the nicest women I ever knew. We developed a nice friendship with them. They knew where I was at. I knew where they were at. What was kind of a hoot, our mail would get mixed up, which was delightful, because they'd come over with something from Focus on the Family like it was toxic waste, you know. But it was okay. We got along. But the point is, we talked to our sons about it, said, guys, this is how we love our neighbor. Sometimes you'll know people who are lesbian or gay, and we pray for them, and we love them, and we respect them, and we want you to see that you can do that. So I think it's very doable.
Good.
I do.
How would you respond to a Christian who believes that your adult child wouldn't be gay if you'd done a better job of Christian parenting?
Well, I think that's a very cruel thing to say. It's like saying if you have cancer, it's your fault. You don't have enough faith, or you must have sinned. Look, we didn't talk about this today, but there wasn't time. But there is no one theory on what creates homosexuality that will hold up in all cases. You will sometimes hear testimonials from guys, for example, who will say, I had a lousy relationship with my dad. Well, I did. I truly did. But I don't blame him for choices I made. And I know plenty of gay men who had wonderful relationships with their dads, and lesbian women who had wonderful relationships with their mothers and with both parents. So the Bible doesn't tell us that homosexuality comes from bad parenting. It says it's a result of the sin nature. So I would basically say you're assuming something that is not only unfair, but rather cruel to assume, because they are. Yeah.
That's good. Now you've addressed this, just maybe touched on this again. Should Christians attend the weddings of gay people who aren't identifying as Christians for the sake of preserving the relationship and showing them love?
I don't think it ever shows love to misrepresent God to people. And I believe it would be a misrepresentation to do that. If you have to go there to preserve the relationship, I would say something's wrong with the relationship. Now, I want to backtrack a little. As I told you before, there are Christian leaders, and I mean solid Bible-believing Christian leaders who disagree with me. So in fairness, I want to say we are not all on the same page about this. I can only tell you my own position. I don't believe that you are going to accomplish anything by accommodating that request. I truly don't. And I think that there are times we let ourselves get held hostage by requests like that, instead of going with the obvious point, which is it really fair to ask me to do something I don't believe in for the sake of preserving our relationship? Because I'm not doing that to you. So be fair. That's my take on it.
That's good. Let's see. Okay. What do you do when you have adult children still living at home and they are living an immoral lifestyle?
It depends on how they are living that out and what terms you have for them. For example, if you have an adult son living at home or daughter living at home who is in an immoral relationship, but they are not committing that sin under your roof, in other ways they are living a responsible adult life, I don't think you automatically need to tell them, I won't support you or have you live here unless you repent of that. I do think you need to take it case by case. In most cases, I don't think you need to get to that drastic of a level. I think you do need to let them know, my support for you is not a support for the relationship you are in. It is a support for you to be able to finish your degree, to make a living, or whatever the reason is for you still living here. I want to accomplish that, but I want to make it clear to you, this is not a support for that part of your life. And if you ever ask me to support that I will not be able to do.
Okay.
But again, it should be taken case by case. It really should.
I'm going to combine two questions here. One that's kind of a little bit lower down the list. But the first question, what is binary? And the second question is, how do you approach a combative, non-binary trans daughter who has known the truth?
Yeah, okay. Binary in the common vernacular means either one or the other, male or female. And we are being taught today that there's something wrong with binaries. And in fact, I believe that it's a great deception of the day to try to blur the binaries. People are trying to blur the binary between truth and error, between true doctrine and false doctrine, between male and female. And I believe that we worship a God who established binaries when he created the world. God spoke, and what did he speak? A bunch of binaries. Let there be darkness, let there be light. Let there be the earth, let there be the sea, let there be the sky, let there be the land, let there be animals, humans, and male and female. Binaries. Now, if somebody is non-binary, they're embracing something I believe is a distortion of what God created and what he contended. How to deal with someone who is combative, I would start with the combativeness itself and say, look, we are adults. We are going to act like adults, aren't we? Can't we do that? Because if you are needlessly combative with me, you are advertising a level of immaturity, which I don't think you want to advertise. So please, let's be adult about this. I disagree with you. You disagree with me. We can live with that. If we are mature enough to talk about it without alienating each other, let's talk about it. Otherwise, we're going to have to drop it. But what you're not going to do is pick a fight with me that I don't want to have, nor am I going to be your punching bag. So let's talk like adults if we're going to talk at all.
Good. Okay. How to respond to somebody saying, if you don't affirm, you are rejecting my identity. You are rejecting me, and that's unloving, hateful, and oppressive.
Mm-hmm. I would say you're making some very big linguistic leaps, so big I almost see you using a pole vault to do it. Because you're saying, if you don't affirm my identity, you are rejecting me. Well, now, wait a minute. What if, just to be ridiculous, I said that I am currently identifying myself as a millionaire? And if you don't identify me that way, you're rejecting me. Well, I'm basically demanding that you go along with something that you do not see or believe in, and that isn't a reasonable thing to do. I think you have to point out to the person, it is not fair, it's not accurate, and it's not adult to ascribe hatred to disagreement or hatred to disapproval. So I do not accept the linguistic distortions you're trying to impose on me, and I'm hoping that we can do better than that.
Great.
Yeah.
You're handling these so well, so efficiently. Well done.
Thank you.
This is great. It's a bisexual daughter who's ended her relationship with her mom and refused to allow her mom to see the grandkids. What can that grandparent do?
Oh, that's so heartbreaking.
There you get there.
I'm sorry, my short answer is I don't know. A lot depends on what that grandparent will be allowed to do. I think, again, I just want to point out, this is one of this story is multiplied by thousands and thousands and thousands today. This is a madness that's sweeping, literally sweeping the world. Yeah. This madness of saying, if they don't affirm you, ghost them, cut them off, have nothing to do with them. Wow. And it's like a modern sort of an inquisition, either convert or be tortured. But I think what the grandparent can try to do is first appeal, please, do not exclude me from your life because of disagreement, because I'm not excluding you from my life because of disagreement. We're better off with each other. But if the granddaughter really flat out refuses no matter what else can you do but get on with your life? Grieve it as you would grieve the loss of anything. Have people around you to grieve with you, but allow yourself to be strengthened and to move on, because there is life after this rejection. And of course, you never stop praying, Lord, soften the heart of that person who is being so unreasonable. Yeah. Terrible situation, though. It is. It really is.
If a transgender wishes to go back to being a heterosexual man but can't physically reverse the medical procedures and the effects of the drugs, what can or should he do?
He should still realize he is still a man.
Yep.
And there is nothing wrong with living his life out as a man to the best of his ability. This, to me, is no different than if I was, say, using heroin for many years and it had terrible effects on me physically that I still carry after I repent. I will still live the most godly and strong life that I can live. I have known men who have done that, who have had the whole procedure. I know women who have done it as well. And they still carry the marks in a lot of ways of what they've done, but it hasn't prevented them from moving on in life and serving the Lord. And I think that as they do, we ought to be their cheerleaders. You know, they should find in us nothing but go for it, brother, sister. We are so with you.
Great. How to respond to a lesbian sister who claims that by not affirming her two stepkids as trans, that I'm hatefully contributing to the potential of suicide.
Yeah.
Those trans kids.
Well, this is one of those cases I call hostage taking.
Yeah.
A very common thing people will say to parents, for example, of a kid who identifies as trans as well, do you want a trans kid or do you want a dead kid? Now think about that for a minute. And yet I've got on record, and I've got this in a lot of the materials that I've talked about, a quote from one psychiatrist in particular who said, yeah, trans kids are learning to do this all the time, pull a stunt, suicide, it works like a charm. And he says kids are being taught to do that.
Yeah.
And now I don't want to minimize the dangers of suicide. I only want to point out that no, it is not true that causes trans kids to commit suicide. Do trans kids commit suicide? Yeah. Do they do it because they were not affirmed? No. No. If they have been rejected in a cruel way by parents or others, yes, that could contribute it, but this is not the same as that. So again, the thing that I would be saying is, I cannot allow you to hold me hostage to that contingency that does not exist. I will love any kid, including yours. I will love any trans kid, including yours. But just don't tell me that I have to tell them that I think it is right to adopt that. Because, by the way, I don't know that they necessarily will always feel that way anyway. Good chance they won't.
Yeah. All right. What about mental health issues? So there's a case of a an adopted young man whose birth mom was on extreme drugs and affected his growth. He's now actively trans, dressing up as a female and using makeup, and has dealt with mental issues because of his birth mom. How do we deal with those kinds of things?
I think that first we don't want to assume too much. Let me caution you, let's do what Jesus did. He took everyone individually, case by case, person by person, situation by situation, without too many preconceived ideas. So I know, for example, that statistically there is a much, much higher rate of mental instability and emotional dysfunction among the trans community and among the lesbian and gay community as well as there is in the heterosexual community. Now, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, even I used to argue as a gay activist, well, that's because the culture is homophobic. Well, now who's going to be able to say that now, for heaven's sake? No, that argument is gone. The dysfunction still persists. But I don't want to automatically assume that a trans person is mentally ill. What I would say is this. If we are able to have any kind of influence in that person's life, we want to first encourage them to address whatever mental issues there may be there. And then secondly, to look at the possible connection between those issues and the transsexual or transgender behavior and identity. I never want parents to assume that they have done something to make that happen. If you know that you have done something wrong, admit it, but don't presume that that alone contributed to the confusion your kid is facing. And secondly, I think it's important to make sure that as much as possible, you are contributing to a healthier environment for that person to whatever extent you can. Now, I do think what you just described was a classic case in point. We don't know to what extent the mother's drug use contributed directly to the sexual confusion. We know it contributed to problems with the kid. You can't take drugs with a child you're carrying and it not affect the kid. Did it create this? That we do not know. But I think that the best we can do is point out when there is an overt mental or emotional health condition attached to a transgender person, for heaven's sake, encourage doctors, parents, everyone involved, not to allow that person to act on the transgender identity unless those other issues are cleared up, because they're probably not in a frame of mind or emotional health where they can make such a decision, nor should they be allowed to. They really shouldn't.
Good. I know a born-again Christian who was the MC at a gay wedding. He says he doesn't affirm the sin. How can I avoid judging him for that?
Well, let's be careful how we use the phrase judging him. I don't know that you're judging him as in the way Jesus said not to judge. I don't think you're better than he is. I don't think you're trying to say you read his motives or his mind. You're not judging that. But you are judging his behavior, which we're supposed to do. And I think you judge his behavior as wrong, and I agree with you. I think he was aligning himself with darkness in doing that. I think he was wrong. I have not judged him. I don't even know him. But from what you've told me, I judge his behavior and I judge it as wrong. And I think you're right to do so.
Good. In short, is there such a thing as a celibate gay Christian?
My short answer is, I'll say a very prejudiced yes, only in saying this. I don't think a celibate Christian who has homosexual desires should identify himself as celibate and gay, but I will acknowledge that such a person exists. In other words, I would say that yes, a born-again Christian can be sexually aroused by the same sex and choose to live a celibate life, which is the right thing to do unless and until he finds he is aroused by someone of the opposite sex that he can marry. But I think he's wrong to be referring to himself as gay because, as I said earlier, that's putting a positive label on negative feelings. So with prejudice, I would say such a person exists, but I think such a person is wrong in identifying himself in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Again, I think you've answered this well, unless there's another angle to take on this. Should I attend my gay son's wedding? I don't think I should, but some of my other children who are believers feel I should show love and support. What do you think?
Okay, you know what? I mean, I stand by everything I've said before, but my gosh, you're in a tough position. I know you are. I hope you can appeal to your son to be fair with you. You do love him, and you do in so many ways support him. But try to remind him that you don't ever want to insult him by saying things to him you don't believe. Mm-hmm. and it wouldn't be right for him or for you. How much could he really enjoy it if he saw his mother there at the wedding, knowing that while she's looking at him at the altar with his partner, she wishes it wasn't happening? I got to tell you, I wouldn't have wanted anybody at my wedding who felt that way. And I hope that he won't either. I hope he'll be fair with you about that.
Yeah. Should we treat unequally yoked marriages in the same level as a same-sex wedding?
Well, as far as the wedding is concerned, yes.
Yeah.
I would not go to a wedding where a Christian was marrying a non-Christian. That is as obviously a violation of Scripture as homosexuality is. So, no,
Good.
same principle.
Yeah. Okay, we're doing good here. I heard you say something like, when a LGBTQ asks for help, I ask them if they are Christian first. And the question is, I found that Christendom believes them to automatically not be common. I'm not sure if I'm getting that straight, but that's how it's written out here. I don't know if you remember what was said there.
If they are a Christian, if I found that Christendom, I don't have my reading
I remember you
glasses,
saying
I'm sorry.
something. Okay, I remember you saying something like, when you have somebody coming to you, you ask them
Yeah.
first if they're a Christian.
Sure, yeah.
So, do you want to comment on that just a little bit?
Well, only because I'm not saying that because, well, if you're not a Christian, I don't want to counsel you, but it helps me determine what worldview are they coming from,
Yeah,
what kind
okay.
of church are they with, whether their beliefs. That'll have a lot to do with the kind of counseling I offer.
Great. Okay. Do people claim scientific evidence for gender identity? If so, how do you respond?
That is a murky territory. I'm not really sure. Generally, they don't. Generally, it's more intuitive. What they will claim is that many in the mental health industry think it is healthier if they embrace that identity, and I disagree with them, but that's not scientific evidence. The only scientific evidence some people claim, and I think it's a mistake, is either they'll look at hermaphrodites, people who they now call intersexed, and say, well, isn't that a perfect example? I would say that's an example of an abnormality of what you could rightfully call a birth defect, not an affirmation of gender identity confusion. Other people will say there's something called a third sex in the brain or brain sex of some sort, but I believe that that's sort of like evolutionists who say, well, 45 million years ago something happened. Now, what am I supposed to do with that? Were you there? I don't look that old, do I? I mean, I think that it sort of obscures the question of whether or not it's right or wrong. Let me get to the bottom line on this. It's somewhat like the born gay question. I am open to the possibility that someone could be born gay. I do not believe at this point any proof exists that they were. Therefore, I am not convinced when someone says it's been proven people are born gay. No, it has not. Is that a possibility? Yes. Why? Because we're a fallen human race. We could be born with any number of abnormal responses that could show up even prenatally. I think that is a possibility. And the same would be true of a scientific backing. The question is, if something is inborn, does that automatically mean it is God ordained? No, it does not. There is such a thing as an abnormality at birth. So I would not find that to be a compelling argument.
All right. Just a couple more here.
Okay.
How can I support my family members who are struggling with their gender identity?
If they are struggling, I'm assuming that they recognize that they are born male or female, and the problem is the struggle, not their birth body. If by struggling you mean they are confused and they are embracing transgenderism or transsexualism, I would make it clear that you do support them. You love them, you're there for them, you want their friendship, you want what's best for them. If they are open to talking about whether or not they're moving in the right direction, you'd love to do that. If they're not, you're there for them, but you can't affirm what you don't believe in. I think that's the best way you can do it. Show up, be present, pray, and see what God opens up. In many cases, it goes better than we think it will.
Okay. What's your advice? Advice or encouragement of how people can overcome sexual immorality?
Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll take 3
that's
hours.
Right, exactly. I was going to say
Buckle
20
up.
seconds or less here, Joe. No, that's a loaded question. I know.
Okay.
It's a loaded question.
No. I'm being facetious. I think that's such a relevant question, though, really, Brent, because this is a challenge for, I believe, the majority of Christian men and a high percentage of Christian women as well, is what do we do with wayward feelings that we have? I think the best place to start is in our intimacy with God. Lord, I present my body to you as a living sacrifice. Will you give me the strength to say no to desires outside of your will? Will you give me the insight to understand why those desires are creeping up? Will you bring me allies who I can confide in as I am in the process of sanctification here? And will you help me learn legitimate ways to meet the needs of my soul that I may be trying to meet in illegitimate ways through sexual sin? I think that's a very good start. Work on your friendships. Human relationships are such an important part of sanctification. Be honest with key people in your life and be brutally honest with yourself about what you can and cannot handle. Quick example, I have to be very circumspect about movies I watch. I am very easily stumbled by nudity and sex when it's portrayed on screen. I can watch people kill each other 100 different ways and I don't give a rip. I'm not saying that's good. Don't go home and watch a bloody movie. I'm just saying that does nothing to me. Sex, oh yeah, So you have to be honest about what your own limitations are. If you're serious about this, don't set yourself up to be triggered. And finally, let's respect the power of this stuff. When we talk about sex, we're talking about power. One of the hardest things you can do is to abandon an ongoing sexual sin in your life. But if it's there, you must. You cannot be living in the victory and the light you're supposed to live in if you don't take that out of your life.
Good. Is it okay to counsel an acquaintance of the opposite sex in private or one-on-one?
I advise against it. I think there are too many complications it can create. I think attractions can rise too quickly, and they can often rise in the context of the counseling relationship, even if at first you didn't think that they would. Yeah. Counseling is very, very intimate. Mm-hmm. And sometimes a counselee could come to you who is not at all attracted to you, but once you start the counseling relationship and you're giving them good insight, they may find you beautiful. And you know what? Once you see that they find you beautiful, you may find them very beautiful as well. Be careful. This is how marriages are ruined. So I advise against it. I'm not saying I will counsel couples. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that. But I would not see a woman one-on-one. No, okay. I wouldn't.
Good. I want to give just a quick opportunity maybe for one question from the floor. If you didn't get a chance to, if you don't have a phone, didn't have a chance to use Slido. Any questions from the floor that you'd like opportunity to just throw it right now?
Yes, just to reiterate in case you couldn't hear that, the question is about the gay gene. It used to be that was a constant argument. We're born that way, we're born that way, we're born that way. And now you're not hearing that as often. Let me tell you the tactic that we learned when I was an activist, and you're still seeing it today. I want to be brief, but I want to give this the attention it deserves. An activist who I knew was very involved at that time. We were under the Carter administration, and he actually met with members of Carter's administration to talk about the fact that 10% of the population is homosexual. Therefore, the president should support gay rights because that's 10% of the population. And this activist later admitted what we all knew all the time, which is that wasn't true. It was a distortion of Kinsey's research in which he concluded 10% of males who he interviewed had been involved in a sexual relationship, not even that they were homosexual. But several of them were prisoners, sex offenders. So that was not an accurate representation. But what he said was very telling. He said, as with so many other myths, repeated telling made it so. Please remember that. Repeated telling made it so. What does that mean? You keep saying it to the public often enough. Get the media to support you, get the teachers to support you, and people will believe it not because they studied it themselves and concluded it, but because everybody says it. You see? Now that was true of the 10%. And then once the public was convinced of that, the whole argument was dropped. Nobody even talks about that anymore because nobody cares. Same thing with the born gay. That was literally rammed down the public's throat with no verification of it. It didn't matter. It was told so often, people believed it. Nowadays, it's like, oh, who cares? Now, what's being repeated often today is about conversion therapy. Oh, it damages people. They'll commit suicide. Don't tell your trans kids they can change or your gay kids they can change. Repeated telling makes it so. And what they've learned, indeed many other movements have learned as well, is repetition creates consensus. Just keep saying it, especially through the right channels. And you notice on most of these causes, There's widespread media support, celebrity support, entertainment support, academic support. So, hey, when you get everybody lined up saying, we're the professionals, believe us, the public goes, okay. So, again, this is the point. Repeated telling made it so. That's what I think happened to the born gay argument. They succeeded. And I think that now they're moving on to succeed in this latest argument.